Sure, yeah, I'm Rob Krugman. I'm the Chief Digital Officer for Broadridge Financial. We're one of these companies that important in the financial services industry, but most people don't know who we are. Actually, Forbes called us the most important financial services company you've never heard of. About a third of our business is clearing and back office operations. Idea of scope, about 30% of all US equities, about $6 trillion in nominal value on the fixed income markets go through those platforms every day. The other 2/3 of our business is communications, where we essentially sit between large broker-dealers, banks, all different types of companies, and their customers and help them to communicate bills and statements, regulatory disclosure documents, notices, letters, financial advisory communication. So anything that really kind of goes between an organization and their customer, we help facilitate that to the tune of about 6 billion communications a year. You know, I think we're at an interesting space when it comes to digital technology and communications, in that historically, a lot of organizations have built really interesting websites and apps. That's been the primary mechanism by which they wanted to communicate with their customers. They want them to come to them. More recently, we've seen a real shift and a kind of an understanding that getting people to follow the behavior that you want them to do is a really difficult thing to achieve, and possibly a better strategy is to reach out to the customer where they prefer. So rather than ask them to come to your website or app, which some will choose to do and some will actually be very happy there, also syndicate that experience to all the different places where they could go, right? So from a communications perspective, that could be leveraging SMS channels, email channels, wallets, and all different types of apps that are out there. You can push that experience out, communicate more effectively, drive better value for the firm, kind of use those KPIs to actually measure and constantly iterate the communications experience, deliver something that's better. You know, we're in a kind of an evolving world, if you will. The regulatory frameworks have been there for quite a while, and the regulatory frameworks are they're quite open in what you can actually do from a communications perspective. They don't limit the ways you can communicate digitally or how to communicate digitally. Some could argue that maybe they should be a little bit more specific, which would make it easier to determine what you can and can't do. I think where we are, that we're at the age of kind of data privacy and consumer ownership of data is really evolving. And GDPR a few years ago and the California Consumer Privacy Act next year are really changing the game, where historically, if you went back 5, 10 years ago, people would talk about how they own the data. I think everyone's realizing, and what these things codify is that you don't own the data, your customer owns the data. And what's really interesting about when the customer owns the data is if you ask for permission to use the data, they may say yes. And when they do, it gives you the latitude to create all different types of products and be very transparent with them about what you're going to do with that information. It delivers a better customer experience, more value, more trust, and actually allows you to deliver a much better product. So Broadridge invests in lots of areas around fintech and in digital transformation in general. So we're big proponents of technologies like blockchain and AI and the cloud. From my perspective, one of the more interesting changes and kind of really disruptors we're seeing, and if you go upstairs at the conference, you'll notice all of these booths talking about open platforms and open APIs, right? And this is really a game changer. I think probably the most least understood and probably the most powerful regulation that's happened over the last few years is the PSD2 regulations in Europe and the move towards open banking. Because what started as a requirement for banks in the European markets to open up their platforms, provide API access to data and transactional capabilities, really to drive a better customer experience for consumers. In the North American market, what you've seen happen is, though it's not required, every major retail bank has followed suit. So they're all creating APIs, access data, credentialing systems, transactional systems. And in our primary market of capital markets, the same thing is happening, and arguably actually much further ahead, where all different types of capabilities around trade execution, access to information and data is now being exposed through API services. Why is that interesting? Well, it's interesting because the ability now of a product manager or a fintech company or an organization to completely change how they go to market is so much, it makes it easier. 75 to 80% of what we build into a new product already exists. So if we can put our focus on that 15 to 20% of differentiated capabilities and then tie into these platforms of open APIs, we can quickly get to market with experiences that really are built around the consumer and their desire and personalized and relevant to them. So instead of having one way to do banking, maybe there's hundreds of ways to do banking, and it's up to the consumer to use the one that they're most comfortable with. On the institutional and the investment market, the retail investment market, same types of things where you can start to have purposely built applications that hit a segment of the market, right? So much more relevant to them, much higher likelihood of not just success, but a higher likelihood of confidence and value that's perceived by the end user. It's pretty exciting stuff. You know, I think that we're going to continue through our digital transformation. We are going through quite a bit of digital innovation around the organization, whether that's moving things to the cloud, whether it's taking legacy monolithic applications and breaking them into microservices so they can follow this open API trends, to use of blockchain and all other types of capabilities. We are, you know, we often call ourselves a kind of established, very large fintech company, because we are, right? We're constantly reinventing ourselves, and we recognize that going forward, if we're going to continue to be successful, we have to not just be disrupting other industries, we have to be disrupting ourselves. And so that's what you'll see in 2020. You know, I like to walk around. I like to listen to what people are talking about, understand where money's actually going. Right? One of the things that's, I think, really misunderstood about this event is, right, there's fintechs, there's traditional players, but I would say about a third of the people here is money, it's investment coming into the fintech community. And it's really interesting to talk to them and see what they're excited about. It's interesting to hear the startups talk about the things that they're working on. And so I like to kind of get that lay of the land, and because I have a few themes I'm coming out of this year, and like one of them is open APIs are everywhere. Go upstairs. Identity continues to be a huge issue, but everyone's talking about customer experience. And I really think that's powerful, because if we wrap back down to that design thinking approach of how do we create the best possible experience for the end consumer, we're all going to be much more successful in the products and services that we create.